In Port Harbor, where the gray waves of the Atlantic Ocean slapped against rusty piers, the fog was not just a weather phenomenon. It was a curtain concealing the ragged breaths of an exhausted city. They said that in Port Harbor, every paving stone carried its own sorrow, and every resident who passed another was a lonely island in a sea of people. But in that monochrome and cold world, precisely at 7:30 every morning, a vibrant streak of yellow would appear, piercing the gray mist like a lost sunbeam. That was Elara. She was an 8-year-old girl, small with neat chestnut hair, wrapped in a bright lemon-yellow cloak. Elara did not speak, nor did she hear the blaring foghorns or the cursing of the masons on the street. She lived in a world of absolute silence. But that silence was not fragile, because walking beside her were 4 gigantic guardian deities, 4 German shepherds with sleek black and tan coats, rippling muscles under their skin, and eyes that held an intelligence far exceeding that of ordinary animals. Alpha led with the demeanor of a king. Titan walked to the right, solid as a fortress wall. Echo stayed to the left, his ears always erect to catch the smallest vibrations in the air. And Sentinel brought up the rear, his sharp eyes scanning every nook and cranny like a sophisticated radar system. They were not pets. They were Alpha, Titan, Echo, and Sentinel, the gatekeepers of compassion. The people of Port Harbor watched them pass with a respect mixed with fear. They called it the procession of the silent hearts. The truth, known only to the city's most wretched souls, was that Elara and the dogs were carrying out a sacred mission. Her parents, 2 brilliant scientists who died in a suspicious accident, had left a legacy not of gold, but of 4 titanium collars around the dogs' necks. Inside those small devices was the culmination of a lifetime of research. Microchips encoded with acoustic frequencies capable of directly interacting with human neurons, soothing pain, reducing anxiety, and awakening hope in the darkest of places. When Elara stopped, before an elderly homeless man shivering in hunger and despair, Alpha would approach. The dog did not bark, nor did he lick the old man's hand. He simply stood there, head bowed low. An inaudible ultrasonic frequency would emit from the collar, merging with the dog's warm breath. For a moment, the old man would feel a mild current run down his spine. His joint pain would vanish. And, more importantly, the will to live would surge within him. Elara would smile, a soundless but radiant smile brighter than any words, and then they would continue their walk into the fog. But in the world of modern parables, the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow. Not far away, from the window of a dilapidated shipyard, where the smell of grease and rusty iron was pungent, a pair of eyes bearing the shape of death quietly observed. Elias Thorne. This man was like a prized sword cast into a swamp. Elias was once a legendary Navy SEAL, a ghost of the planet's fiercest battlefields. He had traversed dead lands, taken down untouchable targets, but failed to save his own soul. Elias suffered from severe post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Every night, the sound of gunfire and the screams of his teammates echoed in his head like an endless horror opera. He chose Port Harbor as a refuge because its desolation mirrored his inner self. Elias lived in seclusion, locking himself away with shattered memories. But he had a vow. Before his best friend, Elara's father, drew his last breath, Elias had taken his friend's blood-soaked hand and promised, "I will protect her with my life." And he did just that. Elias protected Elara the way a Navy SEAL would, from the shadows. He installed hidden cameras along her route, and he always carried his sniper rifle, its ammunition removed, but its scope still razor-sharp to sweep away every danger from afar. He protected her, yet he feared touching her. He feared that the foul darkness of a killer like him would stain that bright yellow coat. He feared that if he got close, Elara would see the monster screaming inside him. Thus, Elias Thorne became a shadow of a shadow, a lonely hero protecting a silent angel. However, the true darkness of this story did not reside in Elias's shipyard, but in the glass skyscraper of the Nightfall Consortium. On the highest floor, where the air was filtered to a state of sterility, Julian Nightfall was spinning a silver globe. He was Elara's father's older brother, a man whose veins did not run with blood, but with numbers and ambition. Julian's Nightfall Consortium dominated the global pharmaceutical market with the most expensive painkillers and sedatives. To Julian, human suffering was a goldmine. He did not want to cure them. He wanted them to be dependent on his pills forever. And the existence of Elara and her German shepherds was a direct threat to his empire. If Elara's frequency-based healing method spread, Julian's $1,000 pill boxes would become garbage. Julian did not want to kill Elara, at least, not yet. He needed the chips in the dog's collars. He wanted to seize the research, twist it into a tool for control instead of healing. He had dispatched his most elite agents, sitting in sleek black sedans, lurking at the edge of the harbor like sharks waiting for careless prey. Isolate the girl, Julian ordered over his encrypted phone. Sever all connections. When she is the loneliest, she will hand over the dogs herself. That day, the fog in Port Harbor was thicker than usual, as if the city itself was holding its breath in anticipation of an impending confrontation. Elara walked on a cobblestone street, and Alpha suddenly stopped, his ear rotating toward a black sedan parked at the corner of Maple Street. An extremely low growl rumbled in the lead dog's chest. From the shipyard, Elias Thorne clenched his fist as he saw a man in a black suit step out of the car, through the camera, holding a strange device. The instinct of a Navy SEAL screamed in Elias's head. Danger zone. Elias Thorne did not know that his mission to protect was about to collide with Elara's mission to heal. And in this scarred port city, a parable of compassion and courage was about to be written in blood and tears. He did not know that the dog's true target that day was not the homeless people out there, but his own long, cold heart, the soldier dying in his own freedom. The Nightfall Consortium agent began to activate the jamming device. The fog suddenly became frighteningly silent. Alpha, Titan, Echo, and Sentinel began to circle, forming a diamond formation, enclosing Elara in the middle. Elara did not hear the noise, but she felt the cold spreading. 3 days after that thick, foggy morning, Port Harbor did not become clearer. Instead, the skies seemed to lower, pressing down on the rusty, corrugated roofs. A storm was forming offshore in the Atlantic. That morning, before the clock hand reached the number 7, Elias collapsed. The symptoms of PTSD overwhelmed him. The memory of the death of Alpha Team, his fallen brothers, due to a command error that Elias always blamed himself for. In his mind, the greasy shipyard disappeared, replaced by the scorching desert, the acrid smell of gunpowder, and a soul-piercing scream over the radio. Elias, don't look back. Run. Elias huddled in the corner of the workshop, amidst cold steel bars and peeling paint cans. The hands that once held a sniper rifle with absolute precision now trembled violently, unable to hold a cup of water. His breathing was ragged, cold sweat pouring out like a shower. The monster of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, was gripping his throat, dragging him down into a bottomless black ocean. He wanted to reach for the gun hidden under the table, not to fight, but to end the horrific noise screaming in his head. Just as Elias felt he was about to let go of the last thread of life, a subtle change in the air appeared. Outside the slightly ajar iron door of the workshop, Elara's silent procession was approaching. But today, their perfect routine was broken. Alpha, the lead German shepherd, suddenly stopped. He didn't look toward the homeless people at the pier, nor did he look toward the familiar path. He looked directly at the dark iron door of the shipyard. Titan, Echo, and Sentinel also froze. The fur on their backs stood up, not from threat, but from a painful resonance. The titanium collars around their necks began to vibrate softly. The ultra-sensitive biosensors installed by Elara's parents had picked up an extremely strong biological SOS signal emanating from inside the workshop. The concentration of cortisol and adrenaline in the air was at an alarming level. A soul was dying just behind that door, not from a physical wound, but from a shattered heart. Elara felt the tension of the leash. She looked down. Titan, the largest dog, normally as calm as a rock, was now whining softly, his nose pointing toward the gap in the door, his paws gently scraping the ground. Elara did not hear the whine, but she felt the vibration transmitting through the handle. She followed Titan's direction, and through the narrow crack, she saw a figure collapsing. It was the Nightman, what Elara called Elias. She knew he was always watching her. She had seen the reflection of binoculars from the rooftop, had seen his silhouette lurking behind containers to ensure she passed safely. She had never been afraid of him, for her father had taught her. True protectors often hide in the dark, not because they are evil, but because they bear things others dare not look at. But today, the Nightman was shattering. Without a moment of hesitation, Elara stepped forward, gently pushing the heavy iron door open. The faint morning light poured in, illuminating the trembling figure of the former Special Forces soldier. Elias was clutching his head, eyes squeezed shut, muttering the names of the dead. He did not recognize her presence. The 4 German shepherds walked in, their paws lightly tapping the concrete floor. They surrounded Elias, neither barking nor growling. They formed a protective circle, isolating him from the cruel world outside. Elara knelt down in front of Elias. She saw the panic in his breathing, saw the tears streaming down his scarred, bearded face. She let go of the leash. This would be a dangerous act. With ordinary dogs, but with these 4 bodyguards, it was absolute empowerment. She raised her 2 small hands, giving a simple but powerful sign, clenching both hands, placing them on her left chest, then opening them gently forward. Comfort. Receiving the command, Titan broke from the formation. The German shepherd with a massive chest and deep brown eyes stepped forward. He did not jump on Elias, nor did he lick his face like a puppy. He moved with the solemnity of a combat medic on the battlefield. Titan lowered his center of gravity, slowly placing his large, warm head onto Elias's rapidly shaking knee. He exhaled a long, heavy, peaceful breath. The moment their skin touched, Titan's collar activated. A microcircuit deep inside emitted a complex sequence of ultrasonic frequencies designed to directly target the amygdala, the brain's fear center. Elias did not hear the sound with his ears, but his entire nervous system felt it. It began as a warmth running down his spine, threading into every tense muscle bundle. The sound of bombs and gunfire in his head was abruptly muffled, replaced by a vast silence like the deep ocean. And then, in that silence, a voice echoed in his subconscious. Not a real voice, but a concept transmitted through the emotional connection between human and dog, a biotechnology that his friend, Elara's father, had spent his life perfecting. Elias, strength is not the absence of wounds. Strength is the ability to carry them and keep walking. You didn't leave anyone behind. You are carrying them with you. Breathe, brother. The sandstorm in Elias's mind dissipated. The image of the scorching desert receded, giving way to reality. The cold concrete floor, the smell of machine oil, and the warm, steady weight of Titan on his knee. Elias opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Titan's eyes. Those eyes held no judgment, no pity. They only contained absolute acceptance. I am here. I am your anchor. You are safe. Elias looked up. Elara was kneeling there, her bright yellow cloak like a lighthouse. She said nothing. Her face showed no excessive emotion, but her eyes were as deep as the sea, holding an understanding far beyond her 8 years. She knew this pain. She lived with it every day in her silent world. Elias's tears spilled out hot and salty. For the first time in 3 years, he cried not from despair, but from release. The steel wall he had built around his heart had crumbled with the simple touch of a dog and the gaze of a child. Thank you, Elias whispered, his voice hoarse, though he knew she couldn't hear. But Elara understood. She nodded softly, then reached out, intending to touch his shoulder to complete the connection. Screech. Bam! That sacred moment was violently torn apart. The shipyard door was violently pushed open, slamming against the wall with a deafening clang. Harsh light from outside flooded in, cutting across the dim space. Alpha, Echo, and Sentinel immediately spun around, baring their fangs, letting out a gut-shaking warning growl. Titan moved away from Elias's knee, standing directly in front of him, and Elara, muscles coiled like a bowstring. From the black sedan parked outside, the Nightfall Consortium agent walked in. He was not holding a gun. In his hand was a black hexagonal metal device, with red LED lights blinking repeatedly. He wore a meticulously tailored suit, his face as cold as if cast from wax. His eyes behind dark sunglasses unwavering before the four fierce animals poised to tear him apart. He knew exactly what he was facing. He had thoroughly studied the dossiers of Elias and the dogs. "Quite good," the agent said, his voice even emotionless. "A moving performance. Julian Nightfall sends his regards." Elias, though his tears were not yet dry, felt his killer instinct immediately. Search. He recognized the device in the man's hand. It was not a physical weapon. It was a dissonance generator, a banned military device designed to cause neurological disruption and breakdown. "Brainwave connections. Don't activate it," Elias yelled, lunging forward to shield Elara. But the agent had pressed the button. A piercing, whining sound like metal scraping glass, but at a frequency higher than the human ear could tolerate, exploded in the cramped space of the shipyard. The impact was immediate and devastating. The four valiant German shepherds suddenly froze, whining in agony. They shook their heads violently, stumbling like drunks. The jamming device was directly attacking their hypersensitive hearing, and worse, it was disrupting the microchips in their collars, turning messages of healing into painful electrical impulses. Titan roared, trying to charge at the man, but the pain from the sound waves disoriented him, causing him to crash into an empty oil drum. Alpha collapsed to the ground, his front paws clutching his head. But the one most severely affected was Elara. Though she was deaf, the device did not attack the eardrum. It attacked the vestibular system and the tactile nervous system. Elara clutched her chest, her mouth open in a soundless scream. She felt as if the space around her was shattering, crushing her ribcage. The invisible connection between her and the dogs, the only lifeline keeping her safe in this world, was abruptly severed. She fell into a state of absolute isolation. Worse than the silence she was accustomed to. It was the isolation of pure terror. "The goal is not murder, Mr. Thorne," the agent said loudly, overriding the device's shriek, slowly stepping toward them. "The goal is separation. Her father's brother wants to prove one thing. Without connection, all of you are just weak, insane creatures." He aimed the device directly at Elara, increasing the intensity to maximum. An invisible wall of sound surrounded the girl, preventing anyone from approaching. Elias saw Elara convulsing on the floor, saw his four-legged friends writhing. In pain, anger flared within him, but this time it was not the blind rage of PTSD. It was cold, sharp, and precise. Titan's healing had not vanished. It had awakened the sleeping lion. "Wrong!" Elias roared, grabbing a long iron bar from the scrap heap. He was no longer the collapsed man of 10 minutes ago. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life. You woke me up." But the agent merely sneered. He knew that, with this device, Elias couldn't get close to Elara without the sound waves paralyzing his brain. He was holding hostages with an invisible wall. He wanted to see Elias helpless, wanted to see Elara completely broken, to prove that the Nightfall Consortium's technology reigned supreme, not the sentimental feelings of her parents. Elias stood there, the iron bar in his hand, sweat mixing with tears on his face. He looked into Elara's eyes through the wall of sound waves. She was looking at him, panicked, pleading for rescue. He needed to calm down, to curb the anger within him so that it subsided, giving way to a deadly stillness, the absolute focus of a Navy SEAL who had identified the enemy's weak point. He didn't need to strike the man. He just needed to break his concentration. Elias dropped the long iron bar, a weapon too cumbersome for a lightning-fast attack. His sharp eyes scanned the greasy workbench nearby and caught sight of a heavy metal wrench. Right behind the agent's back, a large sheet of corrugated iron used to patch the damaged roof was hanging precariously, held only by a thin chain. Taking a deep breath, Elias put all his strength in his right arm. With a decisive and millimeter-perfect motion, he hurled the wrench through the air. The wrench violently collided with the corrugated iron, creating a jarring, sharp, and rough metallic clang, completely interrupting the device's steady sound wave. The sudden, violent noise right behind the agent's head triggered his survival instinct. He flinched, his shoulders recoiling in a natural reflex. In a momentary loss of control, his thumb slipped off the activation button. The black box fell from his hand, struck the concrete floor, and went silent. The silence descended as abruptly as a punch. The invisible wall of sound collapsed. The space in the shipyard returned to the sound of the sea wind, whistling through the cracks and the gasping breaths of the people and animals inside. Elara was the fastest to react. The release from the sound wave pressure jolted her awake. She was not afraid, nor did she retreat. She knew this was the only chance to end this conflict without bloodshed. Standing up on still, trembling legs, but with unwavering eyes, Elara looked straight at the four German shepherds who were gradually regaining consciousness. She raised both hands high, her fingers dancing in the air, then clasped them into a heart shape before her chest, before opening them wide like a blooming flower. The sign, 4 hearts, 1 song. It was the highest command her parents had programmed, a command that had never been used because it required a tremendous synchronization of energy from all 4 dogs. Alpha, Titan, Echo, and Sentinel instantly understood. They did not attack the agent who was clumsily bending down to pick up the device. Instead, they charged toward Elias and the man, but not to maul them. The 4 dogs moved with the speed of the wind, forming a closed circle encompassing both men and Elara in the center. Simultaneously, the 4 titanium collars around their necks glowed with a soft blue light. The microcircuits inside began to vibrate at a special frequency. The alpha and theta frequencies, the frequencies of deep healing, of maternal love, and of forgiveness. The symphony of compassion began. It was not music in the conventional sense. It was a resonance. The space in the workshop seemed to be warped by an invisible but dense wave of energy. For Elias, the feeling was like being adrift on a warm river. The gunfire, the screams, the smell of gunpowder, and the image of the scorching desert, all the sharp fragments of PTSD embedded in his brain, began to melt. He felt an invisible hand, gentle and forgiving, caressing the scars on his soul. For the first time in years, the rock pressing on his chest disappeared. He inhaled, and the air no longer smelled of guilt. It smelled of life. He did not forget the past, but its pain no longer held the power to torment him. Elias closed his eyes, tears streaming, but they were the tears of a man who had just been reborn. But the true miracle happened to the Nightfall Consortium agent. He had just touched the jamming device when the wave of energy hit. He wanted to scream, wanted to resist, but his body froze. The symphony did not attack his physical body. It attacked the emptiness in his soul. This man had lived his whole life in calculation, coldness, and obedience to the command of money. He had forgotten the feeling of being loved, of being moved. But now, the 4 dogs were forcing his brain to remember. He saw the image of his deceased mother smiling. He recalled the feeling of holding his newborn son for the first time, the son he had abandoned to pursue his career. His ironclad shell shattered. Greed, ruthlessness were pushed back by a primal and thousands of times. Greater force, compassion. He realized he was not a machine. He was a human being, and he was suffering. The jamming device slipped from his hand for the second time. The agent collapsed to his knees, burying his face in his hands. Sobbing sounds burst from his throat, tearing the silence. He cried like a child, cried for everything he had lost, cried for the monster he had become. He was not defeated by force. He was defeated because he had been cured of the disease of indifference. Elara walked over. She was not afraid of the man kneeling there. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder, then signaled for Titan to approach. The large dog softly licked the agent's trembling hand. It was the final forgiveness. When the sound of the symphony gradually faded, the atmosphere in the shipyard had completely changed. It was no longer a refuge for ghosts. It had become a sanctuary of redemption. The agent staggered to his feet. He dared not look Elias or Elara in the eyes. He left the jamming device on the floor, a symbol of evil surrendering to good. He turned his back, stumbled out of the workshop, and vanished into the fog. He would not return to the Nightfall Consortium. He could not. Once a person has found their soul, they cannot return to being a machine. Elias stood there, feeling the relief spreading through every cell. He looked at his hands that had once only known how to hold a gun and kill. Now he felt they could do so much more. He walked over to Elara. The girl looked up at him. For the first time on that serious, prematurely aged face, a radiant smile bloomed like the sun breaking through the clouds over Port Harbor. That smile needed no sound, yet it resonated more powerfully than any words. Elias knelt on one knee, placing his large, calloused hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," he said, knowing she couldn't hear, but he knew she understood. "You saved me." Elara shook her head, pointing to Elias's left chest, then to her own chest, and finally to the 4 dogs wagging their tails around them. "We saved each other." Elias stood up, taking a deep breath of the salty sea wind that poured in through the open door. He looked out, where the city of Port Harbor was still shrouded in fog and unnamed sorrows. But now, he was no longer afraid of it. "We have a lot of work to do." "Elara," Elias said, his voice deep and firm. He walked to the corner of the workshop, picked up his dusty old jacket, and draped it over his shoulder. He was no longer a lonely hero fleeing the past. He was Elara's teammate. Elara nodded, firmly gripping Alpha's leash. The German shepherds stood tall, their posture majestic, ready for the next journey. They walked out of the shipyard, into the city's dim light. A broken veteran, a girl who could not speak, and 4 dogs carrying the hearts of angels. They carried no guns or bullets. They carried a far more powerful weapon. And as their silhouettes disappeared into the fog, people said that the fog in Port Harbor seemed to lift faster in the places they walked through. Because where there is compassion, darkness cannot exist. The story of the gatekeepers and the nightman became a modern parable, reminding the world that humanity's greatest strength lies not in its capacity for war, but in the courage to heal one another.